Derek sat on the couch, mindlessly flipping through the TV channels, though none of it was truly registering. His thoughts were consumed with doubt. Lately, Emma, his wife, had been unusually distant, often arriving home late with questionable excuses. Derek couldn't shake the gnawing feeling that something was off. As he heard her approaching footsteps, he braced himself. Emma entered the living room, her expression oddly upbeat. Derek looked up, his eyes narrowing suspiciously. "Where are you headed this time?" he asked, striving to keep his voice calm. "Josh is waiting outside," she responded, sounding unnervingly nonchalant. "Come on, I'll introduce you to him." Derek's blood boiled. His fists tightened as he fought to keep his anger in check. "Josh? And who exactly is Josh?" he demanded, his voice rising. Emma didn't flinch. "Just a friend," she replied with a shrug, though her eyes flickered with a trace of guilt. Derek rose to his feet, his height and presence suddenly imposing. "If he steps anywhere near this house, I'll break his face. And if you leave with him now, don't bother coming back, because you'll be paying for it forever." His voice was a growl, thick with barely restrained fury. Emma's eyes widened briefly, but she quickly composed herself, her expression defiant. She straightened up, meeting his gaze head-on. "I'm going, Derek," she said coldly, her tone final. "You can't control me like some loser." Derek's heart pounded as he watched Emma walk out. He wanted to shout to stop her, but his pride rooted him in place. The door slammed behind her, and a wave of betrayal washed over him. He moved to the window, glaring down at a sleek black car idling on the curb. A tall figure leaned against it, casually smoking a cigarette. That must be Josh. Derek's fists clenched tighter. He considered storming outside to confront him, but knew it would solve nothing. Taking a deep breath, he backed away from the window. Meanwhile, Emma's heart raced with adrenaline as she approached the car. The sleek vehicle gleamed under the streetlights, a stark contrast to the humdrum life she was leaving behind. The excitement of her affair clouded her mind, blinding her to the consequences. Josh opened the car door for her, flashing a confident smile. "Ready for a night to remember?" he asked. Emma nodded, sliding into the passenger seat. "Absolutely. Can't wait to see your place," she replied, a hint of anticipation in her voice. They drove through the city, the lights a blur, as music pulsed from the stereo. Emma glanced at Josh, admiring his easy demeanor and sharp features, so different from the tension she felt at home with Derek. Soon, they pulled up to a luxury hotel. Josh handed the valet the keys and led Emma inside. The lobby was grand, marble floors and chandeliers reflecting opulence. As they stepped into the elevator, Josh pulled her close, his hand resting on her waist. Emma's pulse quickened. When they reached the suite, Josh swiped the keycard, revealing a lavish room. A king-sized bed, plush furnishings, and a sweeping view of the city's skyline. Wasting no time, Josh poured them both glasses of champagne, toasting to the evening. Emma took a sip, relishing the fizzy sensation, and soon they were locked in a passionate kiss. For a while, the world outside didn't exist. They indulged in fine dining, laughter, and stolen glances, the night stretching out before them like an endless escape. But when morning came, reality hit Emma hard. She stood by the window, watching the sunrise as guilt crept in. Josh remained asleep, oblivious to the storm brewing in her mind. She quietly slipped out of bed, staring down at the city streets below. Thoughts of Derek and the life she was wrecking flooded her mind. Back at home, Derek was making moves of his own. The house felt hollow without Emma, but he was determined to reclaim his life. He started methodically packing all of her belongings into boxes: clothes, shoes, books, personal effects. Everything went, each box labeled and stacked in the garage. It was a mechanical process, his sole focus on erasing every trace of her. Derek also took practical steps, like changing the locks and blocking her number. He was furious, but his revenge would be precise, calculated. In his home office, Derek crafted a list of tasks. At the top, contact his lawyer, Bryce. The following morning, Derek sat across from Bryce in his lawyer's office. A thick stack of documents lay between them on the table. "Tell me everything," Bryce instructed, leaning forward. Derek recounted the past few weeks, his voice hardening as he described Emma's growing distance, her late nights, and her ultimate betrayal by leaving with Josh. Bryce listened intently, occasionally jotting down notes and asking for clarification. When Derek finished, Bryce leaned back in his chair, his expression serious. "We need to make sure she doesn't walk away with a dime," Bryce said flatly. Derek nodded, fully aware of what was at stake. "I've already set up surveillance. I'm tracking everything she's doing." Bryce's eyes lit up. "Good. The more evidence, the better. We'll need photos, videos, anything showing her involvement with Josh. If she's spending money on him, we'll document that too." Derek felt a grim sense of satisfaction. His anger fueled his determination. Every piece of evidence he gathered only strengthened his resolve to ensure that Emma faced the consequences of her actions. A week later, Emma returned to what had once been their shared home. After spending more time with Josh, she was confident she could patch things up with Derek. She pulled into the driveway and strode to the front door, expecting to find him inside, willing to listen. But the door was locked. She knocked, the sound echoing in the silence. "Derek, let me in!" she shouted, frustration bubbling in her voice. Derek appeared at the window, his face cold and detached. His expression revealed nothing of the turmoil he had been feeling. "You made your decision, Emma," Derek said calmly, his voice devoid of emotion. "Now live with it." Her eyes widened. "Derek, I was wrong. Let me explain, please." He shook his head slowly. "There's nothing left to explain. You've lost it all." Desperation surged in Emma. She yanked at the door handle, rattling it uselessly. "We can talk about this. Let me in," she pleaded. Derek turned away from the window, walking back inside without another word. Emma's heart sank as she realized just how serious he was. Refusing to give up, she circled the house, searching for another way in. Every door and window was locked tight. She pounded on the back door, her fists sore from the effort. "Derek, please!" she cried, but her voice was met with nothing but silence. Inside, Derek watched her every move through his security cameras. The sight of her desperation brought him no joy, but it affirmed his decision. He turned away from the monitor, retreating to his study and closing the door behind him, determined not to let her back into his life. Emma slumped onto the front steps, her back against the door, utterly defeated. She tried calling him again, but her number had been blocked. Text after text went unanswered as she sat there, alone with her regret. Hours later, with nowhere to go, Emma climbed back into her car and began driving aimlessly around the city. The empty streets offered no solace. Her mind raced with thoughts of Josh, but she knew he was no longer an option. Their last meeting had been frosty, and it was clear he wanted nothing more to do with her, now that she had nothing left to offer. She was completely alone. That evening, she returned once more to the house, hoping Derek had calmed down. Standing in the driveway, she gazed up at the darkened windows, praying for any sign of him. She knocked again, but no one came to the door. Defeated, she turned to leave, but something caught her eye, a note taped to the door. The message was short and devastating. "Emma, your things are in the garage. Take them and leave. My lawyer will be in touch." Emma's hands trembled as she opened the garage and saw her life packed away in neatly stacked boxes. Her clothes, shoes, and personal belongings, all reminders of what she had lost. The weight of her actions hit her fully, and tears streamed down her face as she loaded the boxes into her car. She spent that night in a cheap motel, the walls of the small room closing in on her. Surrounded by the remnants of her former life, Emma was finally forced to face the reality of her choices. She had thrown away everything, and for what? A fleeting thrill that had crumbled the moment Josh lost interest. The emptiness of her decision now echoed in every corner of the impersonal room. The next day, Emma contacted her lawyer. She needed guidance on how to proceed, but the conversation was a sobering one. Derek's case was strong, backed by overwhelming evidence of her infidelity. Her lawyer explained that she had little ground to stand on. She would not be entitled to a settlement, and fighting the divorce would be futile. Emma felt a hollow ache in her chest as she ended the call. She had nothing left. No home, no money, and no future. For the next few days, she wandered from motel to motel, struggling to find stability. Her attempts to reach out to old friends were met with cold shoulders. They had heard about the scandal, and none of them were willing to help her now. Weeks passed, and Emma found herself standing outside Derek's house yet again. She stared at the locked doors, knowing they would never open for her. She had lost everything, and there was no way to undo the damage she had caused. With a heavy heart, she turned and walked away from the house, her footsteps echoing in the empty street. The final chapter of her life with Derek now closed for good. The courthouse buzzed with quiet tension as Derek and Emma sat on opposite sides of the room, the distance between them more than just physical. Derek sat beside Bryce, his lawyer, while Emma was flanked by her legal team. The upcoming divorce proceedings loomed heavy in the air. The years of their life together had been reduced to this moment of legal confrontation. Bryce wasted no time. He presented Derek's case with meticulous precision, beginning with the surveillance footage Derek had collected. Every shred of evidence was laid bare, starting with videos showing Emma's secretive meetings with Josh, and moving on to financial records that documented her reckless spending on the affair. Large screens in the courtroom displayed the evidence for all to see, each piece more damning than the last. The footage captured the attention of the entire room. The silence was almost oppressive as they watched Emma sneaking out to meet Josh, time-stamped videos showing them together at various locations. The judge, an experienced and stern figure, carefully examined each frame, his eyes narrowing with scrutiny. Bryce addressed the judge. "Your Honor, this footage clearly proves Emma's betrayal. Her actions have inflicted severe emotional and financial harm on my client." Emma's lawyer attempted to counter. They argued that the evidence was selectively framed to paint Emma in the worst possible light, but their defense lacked substance. The surveillance was irrefutable, and each argument they raised seemed weaker in comparison to the overwhelming documentation Derek had brought forward. Next came the financial records. Bryce presented bank statements and credit card bills, all meticulously analyzed to show how Emma had funneled joint funds into extravagant dinners, hotel stays, and lavish gifts for Josh. Derek's once shared finances had been depleted, and now the hard facts were on full display. Bryce made sure to emphasize how Emma's spending on her lover had drained the couple's joint resources, further strengthening Derek's case. The judge paid close attention to these records, the discrepancy between Emma's claims and the financial truth growing more apparent with each document. Emma shifted uncomfortably in her seat as the reality of her actions became harder to deny. Finally, Emma took the stand in an attempt to defend herself. She claimed the affair was a mistake, something she deeply regretted, and begged for a chance to make amends. Her voice cracked as she pleaded for understanding, but it was clear that her explanations rang hollow. The evidence against her was undeniable, and her appeals for mercy did little to sway the judge. Bryce cross-examined her with precision, each question a nail in the coffin of her defense. He asked about the timeline of her meetings with Josh, pressing her on the financial transactions linked to their affair. Emma faltered under the pressure, unable to offer convincing explanations. Her defense unraveled with every answer. As the hearings progressed, the judge remained focused on the facts. The evidence Derek had presented was comprehensive and clear. Despite Emma's emotional appeals, the truth was laid bare. She had breached their marriage contract in ways that were both deliberate and harmful. There was no denying it. After several tense days in court, the judge rendered his decision. Emma's actions were deemed to have violated the trust and sanctity of the marriage, leaving her with no entitlement to any financial settlement. Derek's case, bolstered by the overwhelming evidence, had proven too strong for her to contest. Emma's legal team advised her to accept the ruling, but the reality of the situation hit her hard. She had lost her marriage, her financial security, and her dignity. She left the courtroom with nothing, her attempts to argue for fairness drowned out by the weight of her betrayal. For Derek, the verdict was a hard-earned victory. The legal battle had been draining, but the outcome was exactly what he had hoped for. Bryce's methodical preparation and the undeniable evidence had ensured that Emma would face the consequences of her infidelity without taking a single penny from him. As the courtroom emptied, Derek and Bryce reviewed the case one last time. They discussed the next steps, but the hardest part was behind them. Derek felt a sense of closure as the final pieces of his former life fell away. The divorce papers would soon be finalized, and he could finally move forward, leaving behind the betrayal and pain that had consumed him. Emma, however, was left with an uncertain future. The legal battle had stripped her of everything she once took for granted. She faced a challenging road ahead, with no money, no support, and no clear path forward. The courtroom doors closed behind her, marking the end of her marriage and the beginning of a life shaped by the consequences of her choices. With the divorce behind him, Derek shifted his focus to rebuilding. He moved into a new home, one far from the memories that haunted his old life. The new house was modern, with large open spaces and plenty of natural light, a perfect symbol of the fresh start he craved. It was more than just a physical change. It was a deliberate step toward reclaiming his life. Derek poured his energy into transforming the space, carefully selecting furniture and decor that reflected his own tastes, not the remnants of a shared past. Weekends were spent painting, arranging his collection of books and hanging artwork. Every detail was a marker of his independence, a declaration that he was in control of his life once again. He also rediscovered old passions. Woodworking had always been a quiet hobby of his, and now it became a full-time pursuit. He set up a workshop in the garage, losing himself in the craft. Derek began creating custom furniture, elegant coffee tables, intricately carved picture frames, and more. The satisfaction he felt from creating something with his hands was a welcome distraction from the emotional turbulence of the last year. In addition to his personal projects, Derek reconnected with the people he had distanced himself from during his marriage. He hosted small dinners with friends, went hiking, and began attending social events, slowly rebuilding the social network he had let slip away. Each gathering reminded him of the life he had outside of Emma, the life he was now free to fully embrace. Professionally, Derek also thrived. He took on new challenges at work, pushing himself to grow and expand his skill set. His hard work didn't go unnoticed, and soon he was rewarded with a promotion. The validation he received in his career, combined with his renewed social life and hobbies, filled him with a sense of accomplishment that had long been missing. Meanwhile, Emma's reality had taken a much darker turn. The excitement she had felt during her affair with Josh had evaporated quickly. What she thought was a passionate escape turned out to be fleeting. Once the thrill was gone, so was Josh. He had no interest in pursuing a long-term relationship with her, and as soon as it became clear she had nothing left to offer him, he cut ties without hesitation. Emma's financial situation rapidly deteriorated. She had anticipated a future with Josh, but once he was gone, she was left to face the harsh consequences of her actions. Her reputation was tainted by the scandal of her affair, and finding stable employment became an uphill battle. The job market was unforgiving, and as her savings dwindled, the reality of her precarious situation set in. Her social circle, once vibrant and full of connections, quickly dissolved. Friends who had been close began to distance themselves, unwilling to associate with her after the public fallout. Emma had not just lost her marriage, she had lost her standing, her friends, and any sense of security. The isolation weighed heavily on her as the consequences of her choices became clearer with each passing day. Desperate, Emma found a small, run-down apartment in a less desirable part of town. The place was a far cry from the home she had once shared with Derek. It was cramped, with worn-out furniture and barely enough space to unpack the few belongings she had left. Each night, she lay on the uncomfortable bed, staring up at the ceiling, unable to escape the constant reminder of her downfall. She made half-hearted attempts to reach out to Derek, but each call and message was met with silence. He had shut her out completely, and there was no going back. The legal battle had severed any remaining ties between them, and now she was left alone to face the aftermath of her decisions. The weight of her betrayal and the realization that she had thrown away a stable life for nothing gnawed at her, but there was no way to undo the damage. Emma's daily routine became monotonous and bleak. She spent her mornings searching for job opportunities on an outdated laptop, scrolling through endless listings but finding nothing. Even when she secured interviews, her history followed her like a shadow, making it difficult to convince employers to take a chance on her. Every rejection email felt like another nail in the coffin of her old life. Her evenings were no better. She often took long walks through the quiet, unfamiliar streets, hoping to clear her mind. But nothing in her new surroundings offered solace. The local diner where she occasionally stopped for a meal had a worn-out charm. But even there, Emma felt out of place. Every reminder of the past, every thought of what could have been, haunted her. One evening, as she walked past the cafe where she had once met Josh in secret, memories of their illicit meetings flooded back. She had believed, at the time, that their affair would lead to a new chapter, filled with passion and excitement. But now, standing alone on the street, Emma realized just how hollow those moments had been. Josh was gone, and the fantasy she had chased had left her with nothing but regret. Josh had cut all ties as soon as it became clear that Emma had nothing more to offer him. His sudden disappearance stung, but in retrospect, she realized he had never cared for her beyond the thrill of their affair. Now, all she had were memories of their fleeting moments together, moments that had cost her everything. Back in her tiny apartment, Emma attempted to fill the void left by her former life. She hung a few photographs on the wall, bought some cheap plants, and tried to make the space feel like home, but it was a far cry from the comfort she had once known. Every corner of the room was a reminder of what she had given up. The sleek, luxurious life she had traded away for the excitement of her affair seemed like a distant dream, replaced by the stark reality of her current circumstances. Nights were the hardest. Alone in the small, impersonal room, Emma couldn't escape the flood of thoughts. She replayed the decisions that had led her here, wondering how she could have been so blind. Conversations with Derek echoed in her mind, the warnings, the justifications she had made to herself, and the lies she had told. She had convinced herself she was making the right choice, but now, it was all too clear that she had been wrong. Occasionally, she reached out to former friends hoping to find some sliver of support, but those attempts were met with silence or brief, dismissive responses. The people who had once surrounded her now wanted nothing to do with her. She had burned those bridges the moment she chose to pursue an affair, and rebuilding them seemed impossible. Her isolation was complete, and the weight of her choices pressed down on her every day. In her solitude, Emma had no choice but to confront the reality of what she had done. The life she had chased after with Josh had crumbled as quickly as it had begun, and now she was left with the fallout. Each day brought new challenges: financial instability, social isolation, and the gnawing realization that she had destroyed her own future. Meanwhile, Derek's life had taken a completely different trajectory. The storm of the divorce had passed, and he had rebuilt his life piece by piece. His new home was a haven, modern, spacious, and filled with light. The walls were adorned with his artwork and custom-made furniture, the result of hours spent honing his woodworking skills. Derek had thrown himself into his hobbies, and now his creations were not only a source of pride but a burgeoning business. His social life had flourished too. Derek reconnected with friends he had lost touch with during his tumultuous marriage. He attended gatherings, hosted dinners, and joined a local hiking group, exploring the natural beauty around him. These new experiences brought a sense of freedom and fulfillment that had been missing for years. He found joy in his relationships and satisfaction in his independence. It was during one of these hiking trips that Derek met Maya. She was vibrant, confident, and successful in her own right, working as a graphic designer. Their shared love of the outdoors and similar interests drew them together, and what began as a friendship quickly blossomed into something more. Maya brought a sense of peace to Derek's life, a calmness and stability he hadn't realized he needed. Their relationship was different from anything Derek had experienced before. It was built on mutual respect, trust, and genuine affection. Maya appreciated Derek for who he was, and their bond deepened as they spent more time together, traveling, hiking, and simply enjoying each other's company. With her, Derek felt like he had truly left the past behind. Professionally, Derek's life was thriving as well. His woodworking business had grown, earning him a reputation for craftsmanship and detail. He started collaborating with interior designers and architects, expanding his reach and taking on larger, more complex projects. The success of his business was a testament to his resilience and hard work, and it filled him with a sense of pride that had been absent for years. Emma, on the other hand, had faded into the background of Derek's life. Her attempts to reconnect had fallen on deaf ears. Derek had moved on, and she was little more than a distant memory now. Her attempts to rebuild her own life had failed, and she remained stuck in the aftermath of her decisions, struggling to find her footing. As Derek's life continued to flourish, the contrast between his success and Emma's downfall became even more apparent. Derek had embraced the freedom of his new life, and his focus remained on personal fulfillment. The revenge he once sought no longer consumed him. Instead, he found satisfaction in the simple act of living well. Every new milestone, whether in his business, his relationships, or his hobbies, was a quiet but powerful victory over the past. For Derek, happiness wasn't found in retribution or dwelling on what Emma had done. It was in the way his life had blossomed after the end of their marriage. He didn't need to punish her because the distance between them and the life he had built was proof enough of his triumph. The true revenge, he realized, was in the quiet, unremarkable success he had achieved, while Emma struggled in the shadows of her own choices. Emma, meanwhile, had become a distant echo of her former self. She sat alone in her small, dingy apartment, the walls closing in around her. The weight of her decisions hung heavy, and no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't shake the feeling of regret that gnawed at her every day. One evening, Emma sat on the worn-out couch, staring blankly at the flickering light bulb above. Her surroundings were a far cry from the life she used to know. The room was barely furnished. A battered table with a single chair, a basic bed, and a few unpacked boxes scattered in the corners. The vibrant colors and energy that had once defined her world were long gone, replaced by the stark reality of her downfall. She picked up a dusty photo frame from the coffee table and wiped it clean with the sleeve of her sweater. The picture inside showed her and Derek in happier times, during a vacation they had taken together. The image seemed surreal now, almost as though it belonged to someone else's life. In the photo, they looked carefree and content, but that version of her life was nothing more than a distant memory, buried beneath layers of mistakes. Emma's apartment was filled with the remnants of her former life, now packed away in the boxes she had barely touched. Clothes she no longer wore, shoes she had once loved but now had no place to wear. Everything served as a painful reminder of the luxury and stability she had thrown away. She had downsized drastically, her financial situation forcing her to sell or discard many of her possessions. What little remained felt like relics from another world, a world she had lost forever. Her days had become a repetitive blur of monotony. Each morning, Emma would make herself a meager breakfast, instant coffee and cereal, the cheapest she could afford. Then, she would spend hours hunched over her laptop, scouring job boards, sending out applications, and hoping for a response. But the job offers were few and far between, and when they did come, they were low-paying positions far beneath what she had once aspired to. Her name carried the weight of her scandal, and employers were hesitant to take a chance on someone with such a tarnished reputation. By evening, the walls of her small apartment felt even more suffocating. Desperate to escape, Emma would take long walks around the neighborhood, though the dreary streets provided little comfort. The area was quiet, unremarkable, a reflection of her current life. She sometimes stopped at a local diner for a meal, but the place lacked any sense of warmth or familiarity. Even in the company of strangers, Emma felt utterly alone. During these walks, Emma often found herself passing by the cafe where she and Josh had once met. The memories of their stolen moments together flooded her mind, whispers of excitement and the thrill of secrecy. At the time, she had believed those moments would lead to something more, something that would fill the void she had felt in her marriage. But now, standing outside that cafe, she saw it for what it really was. A fleeting illusion, one that had cost her everything. Josh had been her escape, her brief taste of freedom from the constraints of her life with Derek. But in the end, he had disappeared as quickly as he had come. When the excitement wore off, and when it became clear that Emma no longer had the security and comfort of her former life, Josh had cut all ties. His abandonment had been sudden, but unsurprising. He had never wanted more than a fling, and once that thrill was gone, so was he. Now, all Emma had were those painful memories, the fleeting moments that had once felt so exhilarating, but now left a bitter aftertaste. She had convinced herself that leaving Derek for Josh was a step toward a better, more exciting life. But the reality had been nothing like she imagined. All she had done was destroy the stability she had once taken for granted. Back in her apartment, Emma attempted to make the space feel more like home, though it felt like a futile effort. She hung up a few old photographs, added some cheap plants, and tried to brighten the place with inexpensive artwork. But no matter what she did, the apartment remained stark and empty, a constant reminder of the life she had thrown away. Each night, she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, her thoughts swirling with regret. The contrast between her past and present was sharp. Emma had once lived in luxury, surrounded by beautiful things and a comfortable lifestyle. Now, she was living in a cramped apartment with little more than the bare necessities. She had traded stability for the excitement of an affair, and that excitement had long since faded, leaving only the cold reality of her circumstances. In her solitude, Emma began to reflect more deeply on the choices that had brought her here. She replayed the conversations she had had with Derek, the lies she had told to justify her affair, and the moments when she had convinced herself that leaving him was the right thing to do. She had believed she was making a bold move for her own happiness, but now it was clear that she had only been fooling herself. Occasionally, Emma tried to reach out to people from her old life, friends she had once been close to, but those attempts were met with silence or brief, dismissive responses. The people who had once surrounded her now wanted nothing to do with her. She had burned those bridges and there was no rebuilding them. The isolation she felt was overwhelming, a constant reminder of how far she had fallen. As time passed, Emma's regret deepened. She had imagined a fresh start with Josh, but instead, she had found herself trapped in a life of hardship and loneliness. Every day was a struggle, marked by the consequences of her actions. The excitement and freedom she had once craved had turned into a cold, hard reality, a reality where she was alone, broke, and without a future. Meanwhile, Derek continued to thrive. He had moved on from the betrayal and pain, and his life was richer and fuller than it had ever been. His new home, his woodworking business, and his relationship with Maya were all testaments to how far he had come. He had found happiness not in revenge, but in the simple act of living well. The final blow wasn't delivered through acts of cruelty or retribution. Derek's revenge came quietly, through his success, his joy, and his newfound peace. His life was flourishing, while Emma's was unraveling. And that, more than anything, was the ultimate consequence of her choices.